Welcome to my Florida Short Stories, proudly based in the historic lake community of Melrose, Florida. Nestled among the waters of Lake Santa Fe, the pine forests, winding back roads, and hidden corners of North Florida, Melrose is a place where history, legends, and storytelling come alive. Before we begin, we'd like to thank you for listening and supporting local storytelling. Today's adventure is Vitachuco, the Mounds of Melrose, a historical mystery inspired by the real history, Native American heritage, and enduring legends of the lake region of North Florida. If you enjoy this story, please take a moment to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Let us know where you're listening from. We love hearing from listeners across Florida, across America, and around the world. So find a comfortable seat, settle in, and join us as we journey through ancient mounds, forgotten maps, hidden artifacts, and one of the greatest historical mysteries ever connected to Florida. Travel back through centuries of adventure, courage, and discovery. This is Vitachuco, the Mounds of Melrose, written by My Florida Short Stories. Narrated for those who believe every lake has a legend, every trail has a story, and every piece of Florida has a history worth remembering. Chapter 1. The Arrowhead Melrose, Florida. To most people, it was just another small town tucked between lakes, pine forests, and winding country roads. The kind of place you might accidentally drive through on your way somewhere else. But the people who lived there knew better. They knew Melrose had stories. Stories hidden beneath old oak trees draped with Spanish moss. Stories buried along the shores of Lake Santa Fe. Stories whispered through the pine forests when the wind blew just right. And some stories were older than anyone could imagine. Much older. 16-year-old Jeremy Walker had spent most of his life searching for them, not because a teacher assigned him a history project, not because he wanted attention, and certainly not because he expected to become famous. Jeremy hunted for history because he loved mysteries. Every old bottle, every rusty horseshoe, every forgotten artifact seemed like a clue left behind by someone long gone. And if there was one thing Jeremy believed, it was this: every clue had a story. Jeremy had spent the summer exploring the back roads around Melrose in the old pickup truck his grandfather had helped him restore. Between fishing trips, treasure hunts, and afternoons spent wandering the woods around Lake Santa Fe, there was always something new waiting to be discovered. A fishing pole was strapped to the side of his backpack. A small trowel rattled inside. His metal detector bounced against the frame. The scent of pine trees mixed with the earthy smell of damp Florida soil. Jeremy smiled. This was his favorite kind of day. No school, no homework, no chores, just exploration. As he rode, he passed familiar landmarks, the sparkling waters of Lake Santa Fe, a weathered fishing dock, an old oak tree locals swore had stood there for hundreds of years. His grandfather often joked that if the tree could talk, it would tell stories nobody would believe. Jeremy wasn't so sure. Around Melrose, people were always finding things: arrowheads, pottery fragments, stone tools. Sometimes, after a heavy rain, artifacts seemed to appear right on the surface as if the earth itself wanted them discovered. His grandfather had a collection displayed inside an old cabinet, not because they were valuable, because they mattered. "Remember something, Jeremy," his grandfather often said. "Those aren't treasures." "What are they?" "People." Jeremy never forgot that. Every artifact represented a real person, someone who had walked these woods, fished these lakes, raised a family, laughed, worked, lived, long before modern Florida existed. The thought fascinated him, and today that fascination was about to change his life forever. About an hour later, Jeremy parked his bike near a small wooded area overlooking part of Lake Santa Fe. The lake shimmered beneath the morning sun. An osprey circled overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a fish jumped. The world felt peaceful, timeless. Jeremy grabbed his backpack and started walking. The woods here felt different, older. The ground rose gently beneath his feet. Years ago, local historians had suggested that portions of the area might contain remnants of ancient native settlements. Nobody knew for certain, but artifacts occasionally surfaced nearby. That was enough to keep Jeremy interested. He followed a narrow deer trail through the pines. Palmettos brushed against his legs. Birds darted between branches overhead. For nearly 30 minutes he found nothing unusual. A few rusty nails, an old bottle cap, the usual. Then something caught his eye. A flash of dark stone partially buried in the sandy soil. Jeremy stopped. At first glance it looked like another arrowhead, but something felt different. He knelt, carefully brushed away dirt, and froze. It wasn't an arrowhead, it wasn't pottery, and it definitely wasn't modern. The object fit comfortably in the palm of his hand. Dark stone, smooth edges, strange carvings. Jeremy's pulse quickened. He carefully turned it over. A crescent symbol had been carved into one side. Below it appeared several wavy lines. Water. At least that's what they looked like. The craftsmanship was incredible. Every mark precise, every detail intentional. Wow. The word escaped before he realized he'd spoken aloud. For several moments he simply stared. The artifact felt old, very old, older than anything he'd ever found. A breeze moved through the trees. The woods suddenly seemed quieter. Jeremy glanced around. The birds had stopped singing. The wind had stopped moving. Even the insects seemed silent. For a brief moment, the entire forest felt frozen, waiting, watching. Then a distant sound rolled across the landscape. A deep rumble. Jeremy looked toward the sky. No clouds, no storm. Yet the sound reminded him of thunder, far away thunder. The feeling vanished almost immediately. Birds resumed singing. The breeze returned. Everything seemed normal again. Except Jeremy knew something wasn't, because resting in his hands was the beginning of a mystery that had been waiting nearly 500 years to be discovered, and somewhere beneath the lakes, forests, ponds, and mounds surrounding Melrose, Florida, history had just awakened. Chapter 2. The Old Map. The Old Map. The artifact sat on Jeremy's desk all night. Every time he looked away, his eyes drifted back to it. The crescent symbol, the strange lines beneath it, the smooth, dark stone. Nothing about it made sense, and that bothered him. Jeremy liked answers. The artifact seemed determined to give him questions. By sunrise, he was already awake. The first rays of light filtered through his bedroom window as he picked up the stone once more. It felt cool in his hand, heavy for its size. Ancient. At least it seemed ancient. His laptop sat open nearby. Hours of searching had produced absolutely nothing. Arrowheads, thousands of results, pottery fragments, hundreds. Florida tribal artifacts, more information than he could read. But the symbol on the stone? Nothing. It was as if the artifact didn't exist, or at least nobody had documented it. Jeremy slipped it into a small cloth bag and headed downstairs. His mother was making coffee. She glanced up. "Morning?" "Morning." "You stayed up late." Jeremy smiled. "Maybe." She pointed toward the cloth bag. "Still thinking about that rock?" "It's not a rock." She laughed. That's exactly what somebody obsessed with rocks would say. Jeremy grinned. "It's an artifact." "Of course it is." His mother poured herself coffee. "Where are you headed?" "Going to see Miss Amy." Now she nodded. "Good idea." If anybody in Melrose knew local history, it was Miss Amy. She seemed to know every old story, every forgotten family, every hidden piece of history scattered throughout the lake region. Some people collected stamps. Miss Amy collected stories, and she was very good at it. An hour later, Jeremy parked his bike outside the Melrose Community Center. The building wasn't fancy, but inside was one of his favorite places, the historical room. The walls were covered with photographs, old fishing camps, steamboats, pioneer families, vintage postcards, pictures of Lake Santa Fe before most modern homes existed. Every image felt like a doorway into another time. Jeremy pushed open the door. Miss Amy sat behind a table sorting photographs. She looked up and smiled. "Well, if it isn't Melrose's youngest treasure hunter." Jeremy laughed. "Morning." "Morning." She immediately noticed the look on his face. Her smile widened. "You found something." "How do you always know?" "Because every treasure hunter gets the same expression." Jeremy placed the cloth bag on the table. Miss Amy carefully opened it. The moment she saw the artifact, her smile disappeared. She leaned forward. Then even closer, Jeremy could practically hear his own heartbeat. Finally, she spoke. "Well now." "What?" "I've never seen that before." Jeremy wasn't sure whether that was good news or bad news. "You really don't know what it is?" Miss Amy slowly shook her head. "No." Then she smiled again. "But that makes it interesting." Jeremy relaxed. For a moment he thought she might dismiss it entirely. Instead, she studied it from every angle. "The craftsmanship is remarkable." "You think it's old?" "I think it's older than both of us combined." Jeremy laughed. "That's not saying much." Miss Amy pointed at the crescent. "This is the part that fascinates me." "The symbol?" "Exactly." She stood and walked toward a large filing cabinet. Drawer after drawer opened. Maps, documents, photographs, newspaper clippings. Jeremy had always loved watching Miss Amy work. It was like seeing a detective solve a mystery. Finally, she pulled out a long cardboard tube. Dust floated into the air as she carried it back. "I haven't looked at this in years." Carefully, she removed a rolled map. The paper crackled as she unfolded it. Jeremy immediately leaned closer. The map wasn't modern. It appeared hand-drawn. Lakes, creeks, trails, ancient notes written in faded ink. Some names were familiar, others weren't. Lake Santa Fe, Noonan's Lake, Etonia Creek. Jeremy followed the markings across the page. Then his breath caught. Near the center sat a small symbol, a crescent, the exact same shape carved into the artifact. For a moment, neither spoke. Jeremy pointed. "That's it." Miss Amy nodded slowly. "I see it." His pulse quickened. "Where did this map come from?" "A retired professor gave me a copy years ago." "A professor?" "He spent decades researching the DeSoto expedition." Jeremy stared. The DeSoto expedition. The name sounded familiar. Very familiar. He'd heard it mentioned during local history discussions before, mostly in connection with stories about native villages that once existed throughout North Florida. Miss Amy traced a finger across the map. "You know about Vitachuco?" "A little." She smiled. "Then you're about to learn a lot more." Jeremy listened as she explained. Nearly 500 years earlier, Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto traveled through Florida. His expedition recorded encounters with native communities across the region. One of those communities was ruled by a powerful chief known as Vitachuco. Researchers had spent generations trying to determine exactly where those events occurred. No one agreed on everything, but many believed the clues pointed toward parts of the lake region. Places around Lake Santa Fe, Noonan's Lake, 2 Mile Pond, Wahoo Hammock, Etonia Creek. Places Jeremy knew, places he had visited, places he suddenly viewed very differently. Then something slipped from the folded map, a small piece of paper. Miss Amy picked it up. The paper was fragile, yellowed with age. The handwriting had nearly faded away. Jeremy leaned closer. "What does it say?" Miss Amy squinted, then smiled. Only one sentence remained readable. She handed it to Jeremy. Slowly, he read the words aloud. "Follow the water, and the past will reveal itself." A chill moved through the room. Neither spoke for several seconds. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. A summer storm was building somewhere beyond the lake. Jeremy looked down at the artifact, then at the map, then at the note. Somehow they were connected. He didn't know how. Not yet, but deep down he could feel it. The mystery wasn't beginning. The mystery had already begun long before he was born. And now, somehow, he had become part of it. Chapter 3. Voices from the Mounds. By Saturday morning, Jeremy had reached a conclusion. He wasn't going to solve this mystery alone. Every great adventure needed a partner, and there was only one person crazy enough to follow him into the Florida woods chasing clues from a 500-year-old mystery. Noah Jenkins. Jeremy grabbed his phone. The call was answered almost immediately. "Please tell me you found pirate gold." Jeremy laughed. "Better." There was a pause. "Nobody ever says better than pirate gold." "Meet me at Mossman Hall." Another pause. "Should I bring snacks?" "Probably." "Then I'm in." An hour later, Noah sat across from Jeremy at a picnic table beneath one of the giant live oaks near Mossman Hall. Spanish moss swayed overhead. The morning air carried the scent of pine trees and lake water. Jeremy spread photographs across the table. The artifact, the map, the crescent symbol, the mysterious note. Noah stared at everything silently. Then he leaned back. "Okay." "What?" "You officially have my attention." Jeremy smiled. "Good." Noah pointed toward the artifact. "So let's review." "Okay." "You found a weird stone. Artifact." "A weird artifact." "Correct. It matches a symbol on an old map." "Correct. The map might connect to a native chief named Vitachuco." "Correct. And somebody wrote a creepy note saying, 'Follow the water and the past will reveal itself.'" Jeremy nodded. "Exactly." Noah thought for a moment. "That's awesome." Jeremy laughed. "I knew you'd say that." "Because it is awesome." The two friends sat quietly for a moment. Beyond the trees, sunlight sparkled across Lake Santa Fe. Birds called from the shoreline. Everything felt peaceful. Yet somehow the mystery hanging over them made the entire landscape feel different. Older, more mysterious, more alive. The next several hours were spent talking with local residents. If there was one thing Jeremy had learned growing up in Melrose, it was this: old-timers always knew something. The boys visited a retired fisherman who had spent 70 years on Lake Santa Fe. They spoke with an elderly woman whose family had lived in the area since before paved roads existed. They even stopped at a local bait shop, where conversation somehow drifted from fishing to arrowheads. Everyone seemed to have a story, a rumor, a memory, a legend. One man claimed strange lights occasionally appeared near old mound sites. Another swore he'd found pottery fragments while planting a garden decades earlier. Several people shared stories about arrowheads discovered after heavy rains. No one could explain Jeremy's artifact, but every conversation added another layer to the mystery. History seemed to be everywhere, hidden beneath everyday life, waiting. Late that afternoon, Jeremy and Noah sat beside Lake Santa Fe eating sandwiches. The water stretched endlessly before them. A gentle breeze moved across the surface. Noah tossed a chip toward a waiting seagull. "You ever think about what this looked like 500 years ago?" Jeremy nodded. "All the time." Noah looked around. No houses, no roads, no docks, no air conditioning. Jeremy laughed. "You always focus on the important details." "I'm serious." Noah pointed toward the shoreline. "Imagine native villages all around the lake." Jeremy could. Children running along the shore, families fishing from dugout canoes, smoke rising from cooking fires, the lake serving as the center of daily life. For a moment, history felt incredibly close, not like something trapped in a textbook, something real, something human. The same realization settled over Noah. "That's kind of incredible." Jeremy nodded. "It is." That night, Jeremy sat alone in his room. The artifact rested beside an open book borrowed from Miss Amy. The book contained historical accounts from the DeSoto expedition. Some sections were difficult to read. Others seemed to leap off the page. Jeremy slowly turned another page, then another, until he reached a passage describing a powerful native leader, Chief Vitachuco. Jeremy leaned forward. The words seemed to pull him into another world, a world long gone, yet somehow still present. And for the first time, the story shifted. Not to modern Melrose, but to Florida in the year 1539. Florida, 1539. The village was alive with activity. Children played between homes. Women prepared food near cooking fires. Warriors sharpened weapons beneath the shade of towering trees. The province of Vitachuco stretched across fertile land surrounded by lakes, wetlands, and forests. It was a thriving place, a powerful place, and standing atop one of the great earthen mounds overlooking the village was Chief Vitachuco himself. The chief stared toward the horizon. A runner approached, breathing hard, exhausted from travel. Vitachuco listened carefully. The message was troubling. Reports continued arriving from neighboring regions. Strange men had entered Florida, men wearing metal, men riding enormous animals, men who demanded food, men who brought violence. The stories spread quickly. Village after village spoke of the newcomers, the Spanish. Vitachuco looked across his homeland. The lakes shimmered beneath the setting sun. The forests stretched toward the horizon. This land belonged to his people. It always had, and he intended to keep it that way. Nearby, warriors gathered, hundreds of them, strong, skilled, determined. Vitachuco stepped forward. Silence fell. "The strangers are coming!" His voice carried across the village. The warriors listened. "They do not know our lakes." He pointed toward the water. "They do not know our forests." He pointed toward the distant trees. "They do not know our land." A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. Vitachuco's expression hardened. "But we do," the warriors answered with a roar. Above them, hawks circled against the evening sky. The chief looked west, toward the approaching danger, toward the future, toward the battle that would soon change everything. Back in the present, Jeremy closed the book. The room felt strangely quiet. Outside his window, crickets sang beneath the Florida night. The artifact sat motionless on his desk. Yet somehow, it no longer seemed like an object. It felt like a connection, a bridge, a voice from another time. Jeremy reached over and touched the carved crescent symbol. Somewhere within the lakes, mounds, and forests surrounding Melrose, the next clue was waiting. And for the first time, he realized something important. He wasn't just hunting history anymore. History was leading him somewhere. Chapter 4. The Chief's Plan. The following week felt different. Jeremy couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the artifact sitting on his desk. Maybe it was the old map. Maybe it was the feeling that he was standing at the edge of something much bigger than he had ever imagined. Whatever the reason, the mystery had become impossible to ignore. Every free moment was spent researching. Every conversation seemed to circle back to Vitachuco, and every clue pointed toward the same places: Lake Santa Fe, Etonia Creek, 2 Mile Pond, Wahoo Hammock. The names repeated themselves like echoes from the past. By Friday afternoon, Jeremy and Noah found themselves back at Miss Amy's historical room. Stacks of books covered the table. Maps were spread everywhere. Miss Amy looked up from a pile of notes. "You boys look like detectives." "We feel like detectives," Noah said. "You smell like detectives, too." Noah looked offended. "That's just Florida." Miss Amy laughed. "Fair point." Jeremy pointed to the map. "Have you found anything new?" Miss Amy nodded. "Actually, yes. She carefully unfolded another document. This one contained excerpts from historical accounts connected to the De Soto expedition. Several passages had been highlighted. Jeremy leaned closer. "What am I looking at?" "A pattern." "What kind of pattern?" Miss Amy tapped the paper. "Descriptions of the land." Jeremy studied the notes. Open plains, forests, marshes, deep water. The same details appeared repeatedly. The descriptions matched many of the locations researchers had discussed for years. Not proof, but interesting. Very interesting. Noah rubbed his chin dramatically. "So, what you're saying is—" Miss Amy smiled. "Yes? We need to go exploring." Jeremy laughed. Miss Amy sighed. "I knew that was going to be your conclusion." The next morning, Jeremy and Noah headed toward Etonia Creek. The Florida sun was already climbing. Birds darted between pine trees. Dragonflies skimmed across standing water. The deeper they traveled, the quieter the world became. Jeremy carried copies of the map. Noah carried snacks. Everyone contributed according to their talents. Eventually, they reached the creek. The water moved slowly beneath overhanging trees. Spanish moss swayed gently in the breeze. The place felt ancient, almost untouched. Noah looked around. "You ever notice how places like this feel older than everything else?" Jeremy nodded. "Yeah." The creek seemed timeless, as if centuries had passed without changing it. They followed the shoreline carefully. The map suggested they were close to one of the locations marked by the mysterious symbols. At least they hoped so. After nearly an hour of searching, Jeremy stopped. The ground ahead rose slightly, not enough to be a hill, but enough to stand out. Noah. "What?" "Look." The boys climbed the rise. At the top, Jeremy immediately noticed something unusual. Pieces of pottery, tiny fragments, scattered among the leaves. Noah crouched beside one. "You think that's old?" Jeremy smiled. "Very old." For several minutes, they carefully photographed everything. Then Jeremy noticed something else. A stone partially buried near the edge of the rise. His pulse quickened. He knelt, brushed away dirt, and froze. The symbol stared back at him, a crescent, the exact same crescent carved into the artifact, the exact same crescent shown on the map. Noah stepped closer. No way. Jeremy carefully uncovered more of the stone. The carving remained perfectly visible despite years of exposure. The discovery sent a chill down his spine. The symbol wasn't unique. It was part of something larger, something spread across the landscape, something connecting locations separated by miles. The mystery had just become much more real. Florida, 1539. Chief Vitachuco stood before a gathering of warriors. The evening sun cast long shadows across the village. Around him, hundreds of men listened. Some carried bows, others carried clubs. All understood the seriousness of the moment. The strangers continued moving closer. Reports arrived daily. The Spanish were powerful, dangerous, unpredictable, yet they were also vulnerable. They depended on supplies. They depended on unfamiliar trails. Most importantly, they depended on confidence. Vitachuco intended to use that confidence against them. A map had been drawn in the dirt. Lakes, marshes, forests, every feature familiar to the people gathered there. The chief pointed toward the markings. "We know this land." The warriors nodded. "We know every creek." More nods. "We know every swamp." Agreement spread through the crowd. Vitachuco's voice grew stronger. "They believe their strength comes from their weapons." He paused. "Our strength comes from our home." The warriors answered with a roar. The chief's plan was beginning to take shape. The Spanish would be welcomed, fed, allowed to feel safe. Then, when the time was right, the trap would close. Vitachuco looked toward the fading horizon. The future of his people hung in the balance. And somewhere beyond the forests, Hernando de Soto continued his march toward destiny. Back at Etonia Creek, Jeremy carefully compared the stone marker to the artifact. The symbols matched perfectly. No doubt remained. The locations were connected. The question was no longer if. The question was why. As he stood, a sudden movement caught his eye. Something shifted among the distant trees. Jeremy froze. "Noah! What? I thought I saw somebody." Both boys stared into the woods. Nothing moved, no sound, no sign of anyone. Yet the uneasy feeling remained, as if someone had been watching them, watching the symbols, watching the mystery unfold. And for the first time, Jeremy wondered if they were the only ones searching for answers. Chapter 5. The Man Called Ortiz. The drive home from Etonia Creek was quieter than usual. For once, even Noah wasn't talking. That alone told Jeremy how significant the discovery had been. The stone marker, the matching symbol, the feeling that someone might have been watching them. Everything seemed to point toward something larger than a simple historical mystery. As the truck rolled down the familiar roads toward Melrose, Lake Santa Fe appeared through the trees. The late afternoon sun reflected off the water like a sheet of glass. Normally, the view helped Jeremy relax. Today, it only gave him more questions. Noah finally broke the silence. "You really think somebody was out there?" Jeremy kept his eyes on the road. "I don't know. You looked pretty convinced." "I saw movement. Could have been a deer." "Could have been." Noah nodded. "Could have been Bigfoot." Jeremy laughed. "Everything is Bigfoot with you." "I'm just keeping an open mind." Despite the joke, neither of them completely dismissed the feeling. Someone, or something, had been there, and Jeremy couldn't shake it. The next morning, he returned to Miss Amy's historical room. The artifact sat on the table beside copies of the map and photographs from Etonia Creek. Miss Amy listened carefully as Jeremy described everything. The stone marker, the pottery fragments, the movement in the woods. When he finished, she folded her arms. "You've definitely found something important." Jeremy smiled. "That's the good news." "And the bad news?" "The more clues we find, the more questions we get." Miss Amy laughed. "Welcome to historical research." She reached into a file cabinet and removed another folder. "This may help." Jeremy opened it. Inside were photocopies of journals connected to Hernando de Soto's expedition. Most were translations of original accounts written by men who had traveled with the explorer. Names, dates, descriptions, stories. Then one name appeared repeatedly: Juan Ortiz. Jeremy looked up. The interpreter! Miss Amy nodded. He may have been one of the most important people in the entire expedition. Why? Because he understood both worlds. Florida, 1539. Juan Ortiz walked slowly through the village. The afternoon sun hung low overhead. Children played nearby. Smoke drifted from cooking fires. At first glance, everything appeared peaceful. Yet Ortiz sensed tension beneath the surface. He had spent 10 years living among native peoples after being captured near Tampa Bay. 10 years. Long enough to learn languages, long enough to understand customs, long enough to realize that misunderstandings often led to tragedy. Now he traveled with Hernando de Soto, neither fully Spanish nor fully native anymore, caught between worlds. As Ortiz moved through the village, he overheard a conversation. Several warriors stood beneath a large oak tree. Their voices were low, careful. But Ortiz understood every word. His blood ran cold. The warriors spoke of a plan, an ambush, a signal, hidden fighters waiting beyond the village. Ortiz continued walking. He forced himself not to react, not to look, not to reveal what he had heard. But inside, his mind raced. If the information was correct, hundreds could die. Perhaps thousands. The chief intended to lure the Spaniards into a trap, and if successful, the expedition itself might be destroyed. Ortiz knew what he had to do. The question was whether anyone would believe him. Back in the present, Jeremy leaned closer to the documents. The historical accounts fascinated him. Real people, real events, real decisions. Everything felt more human than the history books he remembered from school. Miss Amy pointed toward one passage. Read that part. Jeremy did. The account described Ortiz warning De Soto about the planned attack. Without that warning, history might have unfolded very differently. Noah whistled. So basically, one guy changed everything. Possibly, Miss Amy replied. Jeremy stared at the page. The idea amazed him. Entire battles, entire futures, sometimes changed by a single conversation. That afternoon, Jeremy decided to organize everything they had discovered so far. His bedroom wall slowly transformed into a detective board. Maps, photographs, notes, printouts, string connecting locations. Even Noah admitted it looked impressive. Or insane. Probably both, Jeremy replied. As he pinned another photograph to the wall, something caught his attention. One of the images from Atonia Creek, the one showing the crescent marker. In the background, partially hidden among trees, stood a figure. Jeremy froze. Noah! What? Come here. Noah walked over. Jeremy pointed toward the photograph. At first it was difficult to see. Then Noah spotted it. A person, standing in the woods, watching. The image wasn't clear enough to identify who it was. But there was no mistaking the silhouette. Someone had been there. Someone had been observing them. The room suddenly felt smaller. The mystery had become very real. Noah swallowed. Okay. What? Now I'm officially creeped out. Jeremy nodded slowly. For the first time, he wasn't sure whether they were following the mystery, or whether the mystery was following them. Florida, 1539. Juan Ortiz entered De Soto's camp just before sunset. Soldiers moved about preparing meals. Horses stood tethered nearby. The explorer himself studied maps beneath a canvas shelter. Ortiz approached. "We need to talk." De Soto looked up immediately. The interpreter rarely sounded nervous. "What is it?" Ortiz took a deep breath, then told him everything. The hidden warriors, the planned signal, the ambush, the trap. As the story unfolded, the commander's expression grew darker. Around them, officers fell silent. The future of the expedition suddenly hung in the balance. When Ortiz finished speaking, De Soto stood. The camp remained quiet. Finally, the explorer spoke. "Then we will be ready." Outside, the sun disappeared beneath the horizon. Tomorrow would change history. Back in Melrose, Jeremy stared at the photograph pinned to his wall. The shadowy figure seemed almost alive in the dim light, watching, waiting, following, the same way Richard Henry Carter had once followed the clues, the same way Jeremy now followed them. Outside, thunder rolled across Lake Santa Fe. A summer storm was moving in, and somewhere beyond the rain and darkness, another piece of the puzzle was waiting. Chapter 6. The Spaniards arrive. The storm passed during the night. By sunrise, the skies above Melrose were clear again. The air smelled fresh. Rainwater dripped from oak branches. The world seemed washed clean. Jeremy stood on his porch, staring toward Lake Santa Fe. The photograph remained fresh in his mind. The figure in the woods, the watcher, the unknown person following their investigation. For the first time since finding the artifact, the mystery felt personal. Someone else knew. Someone else cared. And someone else clearly didn't want to be seen. His phone buzzed. "Noah, tell me you didn't stay awake all night staring at that photo." Jeremy smiled. "Maybe. Dude. Okay, I did. I knew it." Noah paused. "You still think somebody's following us?" Jeremy looked toward the lake. "Yeah." "So what do we do?" Jeremy's answer came immediately. "We keep going." Noah laughed. "Of course we do." An hour later, Jeremy and Noah met Miss Amy at the historical room. A large map covered one of the tables. The artifact rested beside it. Miss Amy pointed to a series of notes. "I found something interesting." Jeremy sat down. "What?" "Descriptions from the expedition." "The De Soto accounts?" She nodded. "Several references to the arrival at Vitachuco." Noah pulled up a chair. "This sounds important." "It is." Miss Amy traced a route across the map. "The accounts describe fertile land, lakes, villages, and large populations." Jeremy studied the markings. Everything seemed connected. Everything pointed back to the same region, the same mystery, the same story, and the deeper they dug, the more fascinating it became. Florida, 1539. The sound came first. A distant rumble, then another, and another. Across the province of Vitachuco, scouts watched from hidden positions. The strangers were approaching. The Spanish expedition stretched across the landscape like a moving river of steel and leather. Soldiers marched beneath colorful banners. Horses snorted and stomped. Armor flashed beneath the Florida sun. The sight was unlike anything most native people had ever witnessed. Children watched from villages. Warriors observed from forests. Messengers hurried ahead carrying reports. The strangers had arrived. At the front rode Hernando de Soto. Confident, determined, unaware that history was bringing him toward one of the most significant confrontations of his journey. Beside him rode Juan Ortiz. Unlike the others, Ortiz understood what waited ahead. He knew the tension, the uncertainty, the danger. The warning he had delivered remained fresh in his mind. The trap had been discovered, but that did not mean the threat had disappeared. Far from it. The closer they came to Vitachuco's territory, the more uneasy he became. Ahead, the landscape opened. Lakes shimmered beneath the sun. Forests stretched toward the horizon. Marshes glistened in the distance. Beautiful, powerful, and dangerous. Chief Vitachuco stood atop one of the great earthen mounds overlooking his village. The view allowed him to see far across the surrounding land. And now he saw them. The Spanish. The stories had not prepared him for the sight. The horses alone seemed almost impossible. Massive animals carrying armored men, creatures unlike anything most of his people had encountered. Yet Vitachuco showed no fear. This was his homeland. His people knew every creek, every pond, every trail. The strangers might possess steel, but they possessed the land, and sometimes that mattered more. A warrior approached. "The Spaniards are close." Vitachuco nodded. "Good. The men are ready." Again the chief nodded. The plan was moving forward. Everything depended on patience. Everything depended on timing. The future of his people hung in the balance. Present day. Jeremy and Noah spent the afternoon comparing old maps with modern satellite images. The work was slow, sometimes frustrating, yet small details continued appearing. Patterns, connections, possibilities. As the hours passed, Jeremy noticed something. Several locations seemed to form a rough shape when viewed together. Lake Santa Fe, 2 Mile Pond, Etonia Creek, Wahoo Hammock, and the site where he found the artifact. He grabbed a pencil, connected the points, then froze. The shape looked familiar, very familiar. Noah leaned over. "What?" Jeremy pointed. The outline resembled the crescent symbol, the same symbol carved into the artifact, the same symbol carved into the stone marker. Miss Amy stared at the map. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then she smiled. "Now that's interesting." Jeremy's pulse quickened. The symbol wasn't simply a decoration. It wasn't random. It represented something. Perhaps a location. Perhaps a region. Perhaps something larger. The realization felt enormous. Another piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. Florida, 1539. The meeting between Vitachuco and De Soto approached. Messengers traveled back and forth. Invitations were exchanged. Greetings offered. Outwardly, everything appeared peaceful, friendly even. But beneath the surface, both leaders understood the truth. Each was studying the other. Each was measuring the other's strength. Each was preparing for what might come next. Juan Ortiz watched carefully. His instincts told him danger remained close. Very close. The warning had prevented surprise. It had not prevented conflict. And conflict was coming. He could feel it. That evening, Jeremy returned home exhausted. The artifact rested beside him on the porch. The sunset painted Lake Santa Fe in shades of gold and orange. For a while he simply sat quietly, thinking, listening, watching. Then something caught his eye. A vehicle parked down the road, dark-colored, unfamiliar. The driver appeared to be watching the lake, or perhaps watching him. Jeremy couldn't tell. After several moments, the vehicle slowly pulled away and disappeared. The uneasy feeling returned immediately. Someone knew about the investigation. Someone was paying attention, and whoever it was, they were getting closer. Chapter 7. Secrets of 2 Mile Pond. The following Saturday arrived with clear skies and temperatures already climbing toward another hot Florida afternoon. Jeremy was excited. Noah was excited. Miss Amy was cautious, which usually meant they were headed somewhere interesting. The destination sat circled in red on Carter's old map. 2 Mile Pond. One of the locations many researchers believed matched descriptions found within the historic accounts connected to Vitachuco. Not proven, not confirmed, but intriguing, very intriguing. Jeremy loaded his backpack into the truck, water bottles, notebook, camera, copies of Maps, the artifact. Noah climbed into the passenger seat, carrying enough snacks to survive a week in the wilderness. You know we're only gone for a few hours, right? You don't know that. Miss Amy climbed into the back seat. I have a feeling we're going to need all of it. Noah grinned. See? Miss Amy understands preparedness. The drive took them along winding roads lined with pines, old oaks, and stretches of untouched Florida wilderness. Eventually, the pavement ended. Then the dirt roads began. Jeremy loved this part. The farther they traveled, the more it felt like they were leaving the modern world behind. Cell service faded. Traffic disappeared. The landscape grew quieter, older, more mysterious. Finally, they reached a small clearing. Beyond it stretched 2 Mile Pond. The water sparkled beneath the morning sun. Birds skimmed low across the surface. Turtles rested on partially submerged logs. Everything looked peaceful, yet something immediately caught Jeremy's attention. The shape. From where they stood, the shoreline curved in a broad arc, a crescent, the same shape carved into the artifact, the same shape carved into the stone marker, the same shape shown on Carter's map. Noah saw it too. Okay. What? That's weird. Jeremy nodded. Very weird. Miss Amy stared across the water. I can understand why Carter became interested in this place. The pond seemed to match something. A description, a memory, a clue. The feeling settled over all three of them. This place mattered. The question was why. They began walking the shoreline. Jeremy carried the artifact. Miss Amy carried the map. Noah carried approximately half a grocery store. The pond remained quiet. The only sounds came from birds, insects, and the occasional splash of fish breaking the surface. Nearly an hour passed without anything unusual. Then Noah stopped. Guys, Jeremy turned. What? Noah pointed toward a cluster of bushes. Something metallic reflected sunlight. At first, Jeremy assumed it was trash, an old can, maybe part of a fishing lure. Instead, he found a rusted metal box, partially buried, almost hidden. His pulse quickened. Miss Amy knelt beside him. Careful. The box looked old, very old. Years of weather had damaged the surface, yet somehow it remained intact. Jeremy carefully lifted it free. The metal groaned softly. Noah leaned forward. "You think that's it?" Jeremy swallowed. "I don't know." Slowly, he opened the lid. Inside sat several notebooks, a compass, a handful of photographs, and a waterproof pouch. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The discovery felt unreal. Miss Amy carefully picked up one of the photographs. Her eyes widened immediately. "Oh, my!" "What?" She turned the picture toward them. The image showed a man standing beside 2 Mile Pond, a man Jeremy recognized instantly. Richard Henry Carter, the missing historian, the same historian whose research had started leading them here. Noah stared. No way. Jeremy felt his heart pounding. This wasn't just another clue. This was Carter's clue. His actual field equipment, his actual research, his actual discovery after decades hidden beside the pond. The mystery had suddenly become very personal. Florida, 1539. The province of Vitachuco, prepared quietly. Messengers traveled between villages. Warriors moved through forests and marshes. The plan was nearly ready. Chief Vitachuco stood near one of the great mounds overlooking his homeland. Around him, trusted advisors gathered. The Spanish remained nearby, confident, comfortable, believing themselves safe, exactly as intended. The chief's eyes scanned the landscape, the lakes, the forests, the wetlands. His people knew every inch of this land, every hidden trail, every crossing, every place where an army could become vulnerable. Soon the moment would arrive. Soon decisions would be made that would echo through history. Vitachuco understood the risk, but he also understood something else. Some things were worth defending, no matter the cost. Back at 2 Mile Pond, Jeremy carefully opened one of Carter's notebooks. Most of the pages had suffered water damage. Entire sections were unreadable, yet some entries remained intact. Dates, maps, observations. Then Jeremy found a page that immediately grabbed his attention. The handwriting appeared rushed, excited, almost frantic. He began reading aloud. July 14th. Miss Amy moved closer. Jeremy continued. I know I'm close now. The three exchanged glances. The descriptions match better than I ever imagined. Noah swallowed. Jeremy kept reading. 2 Mile Pond. Wahoo Hammock. Etonia Creek. The clues are all here. Silence settled around them. Jeremy reached the final line. Tomorrow, I investigate the mound. The entry ended there. Nothing followed. No explanation, no conclusion, no final discovery, just silence. The last recorded words before Carter vanished from public life. The pond seemed quieter than before, the air heavier, the mystery deeper. Miss Amy slowly closed the notebook. He found something. Jeremy nodded. I think so, too. The question hanging over them now was simple. What? As a breeze rippled across the pond, Jeremy looked toward the distant tree line. Somewhere beyond those woods waited the next clue. The clue Carter never had the chance to share, and Jeremy intended to find it. Chapter 8. The Crescent Formation. Jeremy barely slept that night. The image of Carter's notebook replayed in his mind over and over. Tomorrow I investigate the mound. Then nothing. No follow-up entry, no explanation, no conclusion. Just silence. For 37 years, that silence had remained a mystery. Now, Jeremy intended to change that. The next morning, the three of them gathered once again. The notebook sat on the hood of Jeremy's truck. Beside it lay copies of Carter's maps, photographs, and notes. Miss Amy adjusted her glasses. Carter believed the mound was important. Jeremy nodded. He was convinced. Noah pointed toward the map. Then that's where we're going. Miss Amy smiled. Simple enough. Jeremy laughed. Nothing about this has been simple. The journey took them beyond the shoreline of 2 Mile Pond, beyond the areas most visitors ever saw, into land that felt increasingly untouched. The Florida wilderness closed around them, towering pines, palmettos, ancient live oaks. The farther they traveled, the quieter everything became. Even Noah seemed affected. Feels different out here? Jeremy nodded. It does. There was a weight to the landscape. Not frightening, not threatening, just old, very old, as if the land remembered things people had forgotten. Nearly 2 hours later, they reached a clearing. Jeremy stopped immediately. The sight before him stole his breath. The landscape matched the historical descriptions better than anything they had seen so far. A broad, open area stretched before them. Dense woods bordered one side. Wetlands and marshes spread across the other. The terrain felt strangely familiar. Miss Amy slowly unfolded one of the expedition accounts. She read aloud. A plain bordered by woods on one side and deep marshes on the other. Nobody spoke. The similarity was impossible to ignore, not proof, but enough to make everyone think. Noah looked around. Wow! Jeremy couldn't disagree. For a moment he imagined the scene centuries earlier, warriors gathering, scouts moving through forests, messengers racing between villages. The land seemed capable of holding those memories. Florida, 1539. The preparations were nearly complete. Chief Vitachuco moved among his warriors. The men watched him closely. They trusted him, believed in him, would follow him wherever he led. The chief understood the responsibility that came with that trust. The Spanish had entered his homeland. They had come as strangers, powerful strangers, dangerous strangers. Now both sides waited, studied, measured, prepared. The chief's finest warriors assembled quietly. 12 of the strongest, 12 of the bravest, 12 chosen for a task that could determine the future of their people. The plan was simple, bold, dangerous. Vitachuco understood the risks, but history rarely belonged to those unwilling to take risks. He looked across the plain. The time was approaching. Soon there would be no turning back. Present day. Jeremy followed Carter's map toward a rise visible in the distance. As they approached, the shape became clearer. A mound, not large, not dramatic, but unmistakable, human-made, ancient. Noah whistled softly. "That's incredible," Jeremy agreed. Standing before it felt different than reading about it, different than seeing photographs. This was real, a place where people had once lived, worked, raised families, built communities. History wasn't beneath them. History was all around them. They climbed carefully. The top offered an incredible view of the surrounding landscape, the open plain, the woods, the marshes, the pond visible in the distance. Jeremy suddenly understood why Carter had been fascinated. From here, the geography told a story, not a complete story, but enough to ask questions, enough to wonder, enough to keep searching. Then Noah spotted something. "Guys!" Jeremy turned. "What?" Noah pointed toward a patch of grass near the center of the mound. Something sat partially hidden. A backpack. Modern. Recently placed. The three exchanged nervous glances. Miss Amy frowned. "That wasn't here 37 years ago." "No kidding," Noah replied. Jeremy approached cautiously. The backpack appeared new. Clean. Definitely not Carter's. Someone had been here recently, very recently. His pulse quickened. The zipper opened easily. Inside they found no wallet, no identification, no personal items, only a notebook. Jeremy opened it. Every page was blank except one. A single handwritten message filled the center. "Stop looking." The three stared silently. Jeremy flipped the page. Another message. Some stories should stay buried. The breeze seemed colder. The woods seemed quieter. Noah swallowed hard. "Well, what?" Jeremy asked. "We officially have a villain now." Despite the joke, nobody laughed, because the message wasn't a prank. It wasn't random. Someone knew what they were doing. Someone knew what Jeremy was searching for, and someone wanted him to stop. Florida, 1539. The warriors assembled in formation. The shape spread across the landscape, a crescent, designed to surround, designed to trap, designed to strike. Chief Vitachuco studied the arrangement. Everything was ready. Everything depended on timing. Across the plain, the Spanish continued preparing as well. Neither side fully understood how much the next few hours would matter, but history did. History was already watching. Back atop the mound, Jeremy stared across the landscape. The warning sat open in his hands. The mystery had changed. Until now, they had been chasing clues. Now someone was actively trying to stop them, and for the first time, Jeremy understood exactly how Richard Henry Carter must have felt. Someone else knew the story. Someone else knew the clues. And that someone was getting nervous. Jeremy folded the note carefully and slipped it into his backpack. Then he looked toward the horizon, toward 2 Mile Pond, toward Wahoo Hammock, toward the places still waiting to reveal their secrets. Whoever left the warning wanted them to quit. Instead, Jeremy felt more determined than ever, because sometimes the most important stories were the ones somebody wanted forgotten. Chapter 9. Thunder on the Plain. The warning sat on Jeremy's desk all week. Stop looking. Some stories should stay buried. Every time he looked at the notebook page, he became more determined. Whoever left the message wasn't trying to protect history. They were trying to hide it. And Jeremy had never been very good at walking away from a mystery, especially one this important. Friday afternoon found Jeremy, Noah, and Miss Amy gathered once again in the historical room. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Summer storms drifted across the lake region. The notebook lay open beside Carter's files. Miss Amy adjusted her glasses. "I've been thinking about the warning." Jeremy looked up. "So have we." "I don't believe it's a threat." Noah raised an eyebrow. "Really?" Miss Amy nodded. "I think it's fear." "Fear of what?" Jeremy asked. "Being wrong." The room fell silent. Miss Amy continued, "For decades, people have debated these locations. Historians, archaeologists, researchers." She pointed toward the maps. "Sometimes people become so attached to a theory that they don't want new evidence changing the story." Jeremy considered that. It made sense, but it didn't explain everything. "Then why follow us?" Miss Amy smiled. "That's the question." Florida, 1539. The morning of the confrontation arrived hot and clear. Chief Vitachuco stood before his warriors. The air felt heavy. The land itself seemed to hold its breath. Around him, hundreds of fighters waited. Strong men, skilled hunters, protectors of their people. The chief looked across the landscape, the woods, the marshes, the open plain. Everything was in place. Everything was ready. For days, the Spanish had been welcomed, fed, sheltered, allowed to feel secure. Now the moment had come. A messenger approached. "The Spaniards are moving." Vitachuco nodded. The warriors tightened their grips on bows, clubs, and spears. The chief's expression remained calm. But inside, he understood what was at stake. The future of his people, the future of his homeland. History would remember what happened next. Present day. Saturday morning brought another surprise. Jeremy's phone rang before breakfast. The caller ID showed Miss Amy. "Jeremy?" Her voice sounded excited. "What happened?" "I found something in Carter's files." 20 minutes later, Jeremy and Noah were racing toward the community center. Miss Amy greeted them at the door. Without speaking, she handed Jeremy a photograph. His pulse quickened immediately. The image showed a section of open land, woods on one side, wetlands on the other. A familiar location. The clearing they had visited near the mound. But that wasn't what caught his attention. Written across the back was a note in Carter's handwriting. Possible crescent formation. "What does that mean?" Noah asked. Miss Amy pointed toward another document. A sketch, roughly drawn, yet unmistakable. The drawing showed warriors arranged in a broad crescent shape. Jeremy's eyes widened. "The battle formation." Miss Amy nodded. Carter believed the landscape itself may have helped preserve clues about how the battle unfolded. Jeremy stared at the drawing. Suddenly, everything connected. The crescent symbol, the shape of 2 Mile Pond, the formation described in historical accounts. The symbol wasn't just a location, it represented the battle itself, or perhaps the warriors who fought it. Florida, 1539. The meeting began peacefully, at least on the surface. Chief Vitachuco approached with 12 chosen warriors. Across the plain came Hernando de Soto. But the Spanish commander did not arrive alone. Juan Ortiz's warning had reached him. The Spaniards came prepared, armed, alert, ready. The chief noticed immediately. Something had changed. The surprise he expected was gone. The balance had shifted. Still, neither side turned back. The leaders met. For a brief moment, silence settled across the plain. The Florida wind moved through the grass. Birds circled high above. Everything seemed frozen, waiting. Then it happened. Historical accounts describe a sudden eruption of violence, shouts, movement, chaos. Within seconds, the plain exploded into battle. Warriors surged forward. Spanish soldiers responded. Steel flashed beneath the sun. The trap had become a war. Present day. That afternoon, Jeremy returned to the clearing with Noah. The warning note remained tucked safely inside his backpack. The historical accounts echoed through his mind. He stood near the center of the open plain, trying to imagine it, trying to understand it. Then something unexpected happened. The storm clouds gathering overhead cast moving shadows across the land. For a brief moment, the shape became visible. The clearing, the woods, the marshes, the geography itself, the crescent. Jeremy felt a chill, not because he believed he was seeing ghosts, not because he imagined some supernatural vision, but because history suddenly felt real, painfully real. Hundreds of people had stood here, fought here, died here. Whatever the exact location of the battle might ultimately prove to be, this landscape carried echoes of that story. And that mattered a lot. Noah walked beside him. "You okay?" Jeremy nodded. "Yeah." "What are you thinking?" Jeremy looked across the clearing. "I'm thinking this stopped being a treasure hunt a long time ago." Noah smiled. "Good. Why?" "Because this story deserves better than that." Jeremy looked at his friend. For once, Noah wasn't joking. And for once, Jeremy completely agreed. Florida, 1539. The battle raged. The ground shook beneath charging horses. Warriors fought fiercely. Arrows darkened the sky. Steel met wood. The sounds echoed across the plain like thunder. Hours passed. The conflict spread across the landscape, neither side willing to surrender, neither side willing to retreat. The cost grew higher with every passing minute. The battle that would become legend had begun, and before it ended, countless lives would be changed forever. Chapter 10. The Pond of Warriors. The storm arrived just after midnight. Thunder rolled across the lake region. Lightning flashed above Lake Santa Fe. Rain hammered rooftops, roads, and forests alike. Jeremy stood at his bedroom window watching the storm move across the sky. Most people saw bad weather. Jeremy saw opportunity, because storms had a habit of revealing things. Arrowheads, pottery, artifacts. Sometimes history needed a little help finding its way back to the surface, and after everything they had discovered so far, Jeremy couldn't shake the feeling that 2 Mile Pond still had more secrets to share. The next morning the storm was gone. The air felt cooler, cleaner. Fresh rainwater dripped from pine branches. Jeremy and Noah arrived at 2 Mile Pond shortly after sunrise. Miss Amy planned to meet them later. The boys couldn't wait. The shoreline looked completely different. Water levels had risen. Mud covered sections of the bank. Tree limbs and debris had washed ashore. The storm had rearranged the landscape. Jeremy smiled. Perfect. Noah laughed. Only you would look at a muddy swamp and say, perfect. They began walking, slowly, carefully, scanning the shoreline, watching for anything unusual, anything out of place, anything old. Florida, 1539. The battle had become chaos. Hours of fighting had transformed the plain into a place of confusion, courage, and tragedy. The warriors of Vitachuco fought fiercely. Again and again they charged. Again and again they refused to surrender. The Spanish pressed forward. The thunder of horses echoed across the landscape. Steel flashed beneath the sun. The sounds of battle carried across the lakes and marshes. Chief Vitachuco remained among his people, leading, fighting, refusing to yield, but even the bravest warriors could see the battle changing. The cost was becoming terrible. Many had fallen, many more were wounded. The future of the province hung in the balance. Present day. Nearly an hour passed before Jeremy spotted something unusual. A dark object protruded from the mud near the water's edge. At first he assumed it was driftwood. Then he noticed the shape. Straight lines. Sharp angles. Not natural. Hey, Noah. What? Come here. Noah walked over. Together they knelt beside the object. Jeremy carefully brushed away mud. Slowly, something emerged. Wood. Dark wood. Very old wood. And carved into the surface was a symbol. A crescent. The same symbol again. Jeremy stared in disbelief. No way. Noah looked equally stunned. It just keeps showing up. The artifact appeared to be part of a larger object. Perhaps a marker. Perhaps something ceremonial. Perhaps something else entirely. Whatever it was, the storm had revealed it after years hidden beneath the shoreline. Jeremy photographed everything, every angle, every detail. Miss Amy would want to see it. Then Noah noticed something else. Jeremy? What now? Noah pointed farther down the shore. Something metal reflected sunlight. The object sat partially buried beneath mud and leaves. Jeremy's pulse quickened. The boys hurried over. This time they found a waterproof case. Small, black, modern, definitely not ancient. Jeremy carefully picked it up. The case felt surprisingly heavy. What do you think's inside? Noah asked. I have no idea. Slowly, Jeremy opened it. For a moment, neither boy spoke. Inside rested a memory card. Just a memory card, nothing else. But written across the plastic and faded marker were 3 letters, R.H.C., Richard Henry Carter. An hour later, the boys sat with Miss Amy inside the historical room. The memory card lay on the table. Nobody had spoken much during the drive back. The discovery felt too important, too unexpected. Miss Amy carefully inserted the card into her computer. The screen flickered. Folders appeared, photographs, maps, research notes, dozens of files, years of work. The room fell silent. Jeremy felt his heart pounding. This wasn't just research. This was Carter's research, the missing historian's personal archive. A digital time capsule waiting nearly 4 decades to be discovered. Noah leaned closer. Open something. Miss Amy smiled. Patience. She clicked through several folders. Most contained photographs, ancient sites, maps, survey notes. Then she stopped. One file sat alone inside a separate folder. Video log. The date appeared beneath it. August 17th, 37 years earlier. Jeremy swallowed. This is it. Miss Amy clicked play. Static filled the screen. The image shook violently. For a few seconds, nothing was visible. Then the picture stabilized. A man appeared, older, bearded, tired. Richard Henry Carter. The room went completely silent. The historian looked directly into the camera, then glanced nervously over his shoulder, as if checking whether someone was watching. Jeremy immediately noticed the fear in his eyes. Not panic, concern, the kind of concern someone feels after discovering something important. The video crackled. Carter began speaking. "If you're watching this—" Static interrupted him. The image flickered, then returned. "I found something. More interference." Jeremy leaned forward. Carter continued. "Not treasure. Static, not gold." The image jumped. "Proof." The word echoed through the room. Proof of what? The screen flickered again. Carter looked off camera, toward something unseen, then back at the lens. His expression changed, almost like he had heard something or seen someone. The video crackled one final time, then the screen went black. The file ended, just like that. No explanation, no details, no answers, only questions. Florida, 1539. As the battle turned against them, groups of warriors moved toward a nearby body of water, a deep pond, a place they knew, a place that offered one final refuge. Historical accounts would later describe an extraordinary scene. Hundreds entered the water rather than surrender. Some swam, some floated. Others simply refused to come ashore. Hour after hour they remained there, defiant, exhausted, determined. Many never left the pond alive, yet even in defeat, their courage became part of the story, part of the memory, part of the legacy carried forward through generations. Back in Melrose, Jeremy stared at the dark computer screen. The video was over, but something had changed. For the first time, Richard Henry Carter felt real. Not just a name, not just a mystery. A person, a man who had spent years following the same clues, a man who believed he had found something important, a man who wanted someone to continue the search. Jeremy looked toward the artifact resting on the table, then toward the maps, then toward the pond, visible through the window beyond the trees. The mystery was no longer about what happened to Carter. The mystery was about what he found, and somehow Jeremy knew they were getting close, very close. Chapter 11. The Lost Artifact. Jeremy couldn't stop thinking about the video. For 3 days, the image of Richard Henry Carter replayed in his mind. I found something. Not treasure, not gold. Proof. Then darkness. The words echoed like a challenge. Proof of what? That question had become the center of everything. Every map, every artifact, every clue. Every mile traveled across the lake region. The answer was out there somewhere, waiting. Saturday morning found Jeremy, Noah, and Miss Amy gathered around Carter's digital files. The historical room looked more like a detective headquarters than a museum. Maps covered tables, photographs filled bulletin boards, notes were stacked everywhere. Noah looked around and laughed. If somebody walks in right now, they're definitely calling the cops. Jeremy smiled. They'd probably be confused first. Miss Amy pointed toward the computer. "Let's focus." Hours passed as they searched through Carter's research. Most files contained location surveys and photographs. Interesting, useful, but nothing that explained the video. Then Jeremy found a folder labeled Artifacts. His pulse quickened. "Guys!" Noah immediately looked up. "What?" Jeremy opened the folder. Dozens of photographs appeared. Stone tools, pottery fragments, arrowheads. Then one image made him freeze. The object looked familiar, very familiar. A dark stone artifact, smooth, carved, decorated with a crescent symbol, just like the one Jeremy had discovered. Except this one was different. Florida, 1539. The battle had ended. The sounds of combat faded. Smoke drifted across the plain. The surviving warriors gathered together, exhausted, heartbroken. Many had lost family members, friends, leaders. The province of Vitachuco would never be the same. Yet something remarkable remained. The spirit of the people, even after defeat, even after tragedy. The stories survived, stories of courage, stories of sacrifice, stories that would be told around fires for generations. The Spanish had won a battle, but history was much larger than a single battle. The land would remember, and so would the people. Present day. Jeremy enlarged the photograph. The artifact looked almost identical to his own. Same stone, same craftsmanship, same crescent symbol. But another carving appeared beside it, a circle surrounded by short lines, like a sun. Miss Amy leaned closer. "Oh my! What is it?" Noah asked. "A second symbol." Jeremy opened another file, then another. Eventually they found Carter's notes. One entry immediately stood out. August 3rd. The second artifact confirms my theory. The symbols are connected. They appear to represent locations. There should be a final marker somewhere between the pond and the marsh. Jeremy looked up. "The second artifact?" Miss Amy nodded. Carter found another one. Noah grinned. "So now we're hunting artifact number 2. Jeremy smiled. "Looks that way." Miss Amy continued reading. The next section changed everything. I am no longer the only person searching. Someone else knows. Someone else understands. If anything happens to me, follow the water. The room fell silent. The phrase appeared again. The same phrase found on the old map. The same phrase Carter had repeated years later. Follow the water. It wasn't random. It was a message, a clue, a direction. The following morning, the three returned to the wetlands near Wahoo Hammock. Mosquitoes immediately declared war. Noah swatted the air. "I hate history." Jeremy laughed. "No, you don't." "Okay, I hate mosquitoes." "That's fair." The swamp seemed endless. Cypress trees rose from standing water. Spanish moss hung from branches like gray curtains. The deeper they traveled, the quieter everything became. Finally, Jeremy stopped. Ahead stood a massive cypress tree, unlike any other nearby. The trunk was enormous, ancient, easily several centuries old. Miss Amy pointed toward the bark. "Look!" Attached to the tree was a rusted survey marker. Jeremy stepped closer. The initials remained visible. R.H.C. Richard Henry Carter. Noah's eyes widened. "He was here?" Jeremy nodded. "Definitely." For several moments they searched around the tree. Then Jeremy noticed something hidden among the roots, a small opening, almost invisible. Carefully, he reached inside. His fingers touched stone, smooth stone, cold stone. Slowly, he pulled the object free. The world seemed to stop. The artifact matched Carter's photograph perfectly. The crescent, the sun symbol, everything. Miss Amy smiled. "You found it." Jeremy stared in disbelief. After all these years, after all the searching, Artifact 2 had finally resurfaced. Noah laughed. "I can't believe this is actually happening." Neither could Jeremy. The artifact felt heavy, not physically, historically, emotionally. It carried a story, a purpose, a message. The question was what that message meant. Later that evening, Jeremy placed both artifacts side by side on his desk. Something immediately stood out. The carvings seemed to connect, like puzzle pieces, like parts of something larger. His pulse quickened. The mystery wasn't ending, it was growing. Because if Carter had found Artifact 2, and if Jeremy had recovered it, then one possibility remained, a third artifact, a final clue, a missing piece. Somewhere between the pond, the marshes, and the mounds of North Florida, waiting. Chapter 12. Wahoo Hammock. Jeremy barely slept. Again. The second artifact sat on his desk beneath a reading lamp. Every few minutes he found himself looking at it. The crescent symbol, the sun symbol, the carvings that seemed to connect to the first artifact. Somewhere within those markings was a message, a map, a purpose. Richard Henry Carter had spent years chasing it. Now Jeremy was following the same trail, and for the first time he felt as if they were getting close to the end, or perhaps the beginning. The next morning Jeremy carried both artifacts to the historical room. Miss Amy was already waiting. Noah arrived carrying breakfast sandwiches, as usual. "Fuel for discovery," Jeremy laughed. "Fuel for you." "Same thing." Miss Amy carefully placed both artifacts side by side beneath a bright desk lamp. For several moments, nobody spoke. Then something remarkable happened. The carvings aligned. Perfectly, lines that seemed random suddenly connected. Symbols formed patterns. The two artifacts became one larger image, a map. Jeremy stared. "No way." Miss Amy smiled. "Oh, yes." Noah leaned forward. "What am I looking at?" Miss Amy traced the carvings with her finger. "Water." She pointed again. "More water." Then another section. "And I believe that's a landmark." Jeremy felt his pulse quicken. The map appeared to represent the landscape itself. Lakes, marshes, creeks, the same places that kept appearing throughout Carter's research. Then Jeremy noticed something. A small circle, carved near the edge, unlike anything else. What about that? Miss Amy looked closely. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she smiled. "I think that's where we're going." Florida, 1539. The province mourned. Families gathered together beneath the evening sky. Stories spread from village to village. Stories of bravery. Stories of sacrifice. Stories of warriors who refused to abandon their homeland. The battle had changed everything, yet something remained. Identity, memory, community. Chief Vitachuco's name would survive. Long after the battle, long after the warriors, long after the Spanish moved on. Because people remember those willing to stand for something greater than themselves. And sometimes memory becomes stronger than victory. Present day. Using Carter's maps and the combined artifact symbols, the group returned to Wahoo Hammock. The Florida wilderness seemed even more remote than before. Cypress trees towered overhead. Standing water reflected patches of blue sky. Bird calls echoed through the swamp. Noah slapped another mosquito. "I'm beginning to think history hates us." Jeremy laughed. "No, just Florida." The trail eventually disappeared. From that point forward, they relied entirely on Carter's notes, step by step, clue by clue. The deeper they traveled, the more untouched the landscape became. Then Jeremy stopped. Ahead stood a rise, subtle, ancient, different from the surrounding terrain. Miss Amy's eyes widened. "I think that's it." The mound wasn't large, but it was unmistakable, human-made, old, very old, the kind of place that immediately demanded respect. The group climbed carefully. At the top, the view opened before them. The marshes stretched toward the horizon. The forests surrounded them. The landscape seemed endless. Jeremy suddenly understood why people had chosen this location centuries ago. It offered visibility, security, connection to the surrounding waterways. A perfect place for a community, a perfect place for history. Then Noah noticed something. "Guys." Jeremy turned. "What?" Noah pointed toward the center of the mound. A dark object rested partially buried beneath roots and grass. Jeremy's heart immediately began pounding. He knew, before he even touched it, he knew the object was stone, the same dark stone as the other artifacts, the same craftsmanship, the same age. Slowly, carefully, he lifted it free. Miss Amy smiled. "Artifact 3. Noah laughed. "You actually found it." Jeremy could barely speak. The third artifact looked different from the others. Instead of a crescent, instead of a sun, a star had been carved into its surface. Simple, elegant, powerful. Together, the three symbols seemed intentional. Crescent, sun, star, a complete system. A complete message, a complete story. For nearly an hour they studied the artifacts. Finally, Jeremy placed all three side by side. The result took everyone's breath away. The carvings connected perfectly. The complete map appeared. At the center sat a single symbol, a mound. The very mound on which they stood. Noah stared in amazement. So this was the destination all along. Miss Amy nodded slowly. "I think so." Jeremy carefully turned the third artifact over. Tiny carvings covered the reverse side. Almost invisible, the symbols appeared different from anything else. More detailed, more deliberate. Miss Amy studied them carefully. Minutes passed. Then she smiled. Jeremy immediately noticed. "What?" She looked out across the landscape, then back at the artifacts. "It isn't pointing to treasure." Noah sighed dramatically. Again with the no treasure, Miss Amy laughed. "It's pointing to memory." The words settled over the mound. Jeremy looked around. The forests, the marshes, the lakes beyond, the ancient landscape. Suddenly, everything made sense. The artifacts weren't directions to wealth. They were directions to understanding, a way of preserving a story, a way of preserving a people, a way of ensuring that future generations would remember. Richard Henry Carter had understood that. Now, Jeremy understood it too. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across Wahoo Hammock, the realization felt bigger than any mystery, bigger than any artifact, because some treasures weren't meant to be owned. They were meant to be remembered. Chapter 13. The Final Clue. The drive back from Wahoo Hammock felt different. For the first time since finding the original artifact near Lake Santa Fe, Jeremy wasn't thinking about what they might discover next. He was thinking about what they had already found. 3 artifacts, 3 symbols, 3 locations, a message that had survived for centuries. And somehow, he knew the journey was approaching its final chapter. Not the end, just the point where everything finally made sense. The next morning, Jeremy arrived at the historical room before anyone else. The 3 artifacts rested inside a padded case, carefully protected, carefully preserved. Sunlight streamed through the windows, dust floated lazily through the air. The room felt peaceful, almost sacred. Jeremy removed the artifacts and placed them side by side. Crescent, sun, star. For several minutes, he simply stared at them, trying to imagine the hands that had carved them, trying to imagine the people who had protected them, trying to imagine how many generations had passed before they finally reached him. Then something caught his attention. The morning sunlight struck the carvings at just the right angle. Tiny marks appeared, marks he had never noticed before. Jeremy leaned closer. His pulse quickened. The symbols weren't complete. There was more, much more. An hour later, Miss Amy and Noah arrived. Jeremy immediately pointed toward the artifacts. "Look!" Noah leaned over. "What am I looking at?" "The carvings." Miss Amy adjusted her glasses. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then she smiled. "Oh, my." "What?" Noah asked. "There are hidden markings." Jeremy nodded. "I knew I wasn't imagining it." The marks were incredibly small, almost invisible, unless the light struck them perfectly. Miss Amy carefully photographed each one, then enlarged the images on a computer screen. The room fell silent. Lines became symbols. Symbols became words, and slowly a message began to emerge. Not a complete sentence, not a map, a message, a simple message, a powerful message. 3 words: remember us. Noah sat back quietly. For once even he had no joke. The words hung in the room. Remember us. Not find treasure, not seek wealth, not claim ownership. Remember us. Jeremy felt a chill. The entire journey suddenly came into focus. Florida, 1539. The battle was over. But the story was not. The survivors gathered together. Families mourned, villages rebuilt. Life continued because life always continued. The people of Vitachuco carried their memories forward. The names of warriors, the stories of elders, the lessons learned, the sacrifices made. History did not live inside books. History lived inside people, passed from generation to generation, voice to voice, story to story, long after battles ended, long after armies vanished, long after empires faded. The stories remained, waiting, present day. That afternoon, Jeremy continued searching through Carter's digital files. Most had already been examined. Most offered no new answers. Then he noticed something, a hidden folder, small, unremarkable, easy to miss. The folder contained a single document. Final report. Jeremy's heart immediately began pounding. Noah leaned over his shoulder. "Open it." Miss Amy nodded. Slowly, Jeremy clicked. The document appeared. Richard Henry Carter's final report. The work he never published, the work nobody had ever seen. The room became silent. Jeremy began reading aloud. "If you are reading this, then you have likely followed the same trail that occupied much of my life." Noah exchanged a glance with Miss Amy. Jeremy continued, "I did not find treasure." A small smile appeared on Noah's face. "Called it?" Jeremy laughed softly and kept reading. "I did not find gold." The smile disappeared. The report continued. "What I found was far more valuable." Miss Amy quietly folded her hands. Jeremy read on. "I found evidence that the land remembers." The room felt completely still. The lakes, the ponds, the creeks, the hammocks, the mounds. Together, they preserve a story. Jeremy paused, then continued, "Whether the Battle of Vitachuco occurred exactly where many believe may never be known with certainty." Miss Amy nodded slowly. The statement felt honest, respectful, grounded. Jeremy continued reading. "But I believe the lake region holds important clues connected to one of the most significant events in Florida history." The report grew more personal, more emotional. The true discovery is not the battlefield. It is the people. The culture, the courage, the memory. Jeremy's voice softened. "Protect these places. Tell their stories, and never allow them to be forgotten." Silence followed. Nobody spoke for a long time. Nobody needed to. That evening, Jeremy returned alone to the mound overlooking the landscape. The same mound shown by the completed artifact map. The same mound Carter believed was important. The same mound that connected everything. The setting sun painted the sky orange and gold. The marshes glowed. The forests darkened. The entire landscape seemed alive. Jeremy sat quietly, thinking, reflecting, listening. For the first time, he understood why Carter had dedicated so much of his life to the mystery. It wasn't about proving a theory. It wasn't about winning an argument. It wasn't about being famous. It was about remembering the people, the stories, the land. The message hidden inside the artifacts wasn't meant for historians or archaeologists or researchers. It was meant for everyone. Remember us. As the last light faded across Wahoo Hammock, Jeremy smiled. The mystery wasn't ending. It was becoming something larger, a responsibility, a promise. And now that promise belonged to him. Chapter 14. What the Land Remembers. News travels fast in a small town, especially in Melrose. By the time Jeremy, Noah, and Miss Amy decided to share their discoveries, half the community had already heard rumors. Some said they had found a lost native treasure. Others believed they had discovered proof of the exact battlefield location. One man at the local bait shop claimed they'd uncovered a secret tunnel beneath Lake Santa Fe. Noah found that version particularly entertaining. "Honestly," he said, "I kind of wish that one was true." Jeremy laughed. "You just want to explore a secret tunnel." "Obviously." Miss Amy shook her head. "Let's focus on reality." The presentation was scheduled for a Saturday evening at Mossman Hall. By 6 o'clock, the parking lot was full. By 6:30, every chair was occupied. People lined the walls. Families crowded into doorways. Some stood outside looking through open windows. Jeremy stared at the crowd. His stomach tightened. This was a terrible idea. Noah grinned. "Too late now. I'm serious. You'll be fine." Miss Amy placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "They came because they care." Jeremy looked around. She was right. The people filling the room weren't there for entertainment. They were there because they loved Melrose, they loved its stories, its history, its people, and somehow this mystery had become part of all three. The room grew quiet as Jeremy stepped to the microphone. He swallowed hard, then began. "Most people know Melrose because of our lakes." Several people nodded. "Some know about the arrowheads and pottery occasionally found around the area." More nods. "But fewer people know about the story that may connect this region to one of the most important events in Florida history." The room became completely silent. Behind him, a large screen displayed photographs. Lake Santa Fe, 2 Mile Pond, Wahoo Hammock, the artifacts, the maps, the notes left behind by Richard Henry Carter. Jeremy carefully explained everything. The discovery of the first artifact, the crescent symbol, the stone marker, the notebook, the hidden memory card, the second and third artifacts, and finally, Carter's report. The audience listened intently. No phones, no side conversations, just attention. The kind of attention every storyteller hopes for. Florida, 1539. The years passed. The battle became memory. The memory became story. And the story became legacy. Children learned the names of their ancestors. Families repeated lessons from the past. The lakes remained. The forests remained. The marshes remained. Long after warriors were gone, long after Spanish soldiers continued their journey, the land endured, and within that land traces of memory remained as well, waiting patiently for someone to listen. Present day. Jeremy reached the final slide, a photograph of the 3 completed artifacts. Beneath the image appeared the message they contained. "Remember us." The room fell silent. For several moments nobody spoke. Then an elderly man slowly stood. Jeremy recognized him immediately. Mr. Clay Henderson, a lifelong resident of Melrose, 83 years old, fisherman, storyteller, local legend. Mr. Clay looked around the room, then spoke. "My grandfather used to tell me stories about this area." The audience listened. "He said every piece of land has a memory." The room remained silent. "He said If you spend enough time listening, sometimes the land tells its story." Jeremy felt a lump form in his throat. The old man smiled. "I think that's exactly what happened here." Then he began clapping, slowly, deliberately. One person joined him, then another, then another. Within seconds, the entire room erupted in applause. The sound filled Mossman Hall. Jeremy looked at Noah, then Miss Amy. Both were smiling. Neither looked surprised. After the presentation, people crowded around asking questions. Several residents shared family stories. Others brought photographs. One woman produced an arrowhead discovered decades earlier near Noonan's Lake. Another man described pottery fragments found on family property. The stories kept coming, one after another, memory after memory. History wasn't locked away in museums. It lived inside the community itself. Jeremy finally understood that. As darkness settled outside, the crowd slowly dispersed. The hall grew quiet. Only a handful of people remained. Jeremy helped stack chairs. Noah carried equipment. Miss Amy gathered notes. For a while nobody spoke. Then Noah finally broke the silence. "Not bad?" Jeremy laughed. "Not bad." "Okay." Noah smiled. "Pretty incredible." Miss Amy nodded. "You gave the story back to the people." Jeremy thought about that. Maybe she was right. Maybe history didn't belong to researchers, or historians, or museums. Maybe history belonged to everyone willing to remember. Later that evening, Jeremy stood alone beside Lake Santa Fe. The water reflected the stars. A soft breeze moved through the pines. The lake looked exactly as it had the day he found the first artifact. Yet everything felt different. The mystery had changed him. The land had changed him. Richard Henry Carter had changed him. Most of all, the story had changed him. Because he finally understood something important. History isn't about the past. History is about connection. The connection between people, between generations, between memory and place. And standing there beneath the Florida stars, Jeremy realized the story was no longer his. It belonged to everyone. Chapter 15. The Legacy of Vitachuco. Summer was drawing to a close. The days remained hot. The lakes remained busy. But there was a subtle change in the air. School would soon begin. The long days of exploration were coming to an end. For Jeremy Walker, however, the adventure itself would never truly be over. Some stories have a way of staying with you. This was one of them. 3 weeks after the presentation at Mossman Hall, life had begun returning to normal. At least as normal as life could be after uncovering a decades-old mystery. The artifacts were now safely stored at the Community Historical Center. Researchers had begun documenting them. Local residents continued sharing stories and photographs. And perhaps most importantly, people were talking about history. Real history, local history, the history beneath their feet. Jeremy considered that a victory. One Tuesday afternoon, Miss Amy called. Her voice sounded excited. "Can you come down here?" Jeremy immediately smiled. Whenever Miss Amy sounded excited, something interesting usually followed. What happened? "I found something." Again. Jeremy grabbed his keys. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. When he arrived, Noah was already there. That alone told him the discovery must be important. Noah pointed toward a table. "You're not going to believe this." Miss Amy carefully slid an envelope across the surface. The paper looked old, not ancient, just old. The handwriting on the front read, "For whoever finishes the journey." Jeremy's pulse quickened. "What is it?" "We don't know yet," Miss Amy replied. "It arrived this morning. No return address." Noah pointed toward the envelope. "Open it." Carefully, Jeremy did. Inside rested a photograph. The image showed Richard Henry Carter standing beside 2 Mile Pond, the same pond where they had discovered the memory card, the same pond that had changed everything. But that wasn't what caught Jeremy's attention. A young boy stood beside Carter, maybe 12 years old. Both appeared happy. Both appeared proud. On the back of the photograph, someone had written a note. Jeremy read it aloud. "If you're seeing this, then someone finally finished what my father started." Miss Amy gasped softly. Jeremy continued. "The story mattered more to him than anything else." The handwriting paused, then continued. "He believed history belongs to everyone." Another pause. "Thank you for remembering." Signed beneath the message was a name, Daniel Carter, Richard Henry Carter's son. The room fell silent. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The mystery had finally come full circle. Florida, 1539. The seasons changed. The years passed. Children grew older. Stories spread. The memory of Vitachuco remained. The memory of the warriors remained. The memory of the battle remained, not because every detail survived, not because every fact was preserved, but because people continued telling the story. Generation after generation, voice after voice, memory after memory. The land carried part of that story. The people carried the rest. Together, they ensured it would never completely disappear. Present day. Several months later, a permanent exhibit opened inside the historical center. Visitors came from all over Florida. Some traveled from neighboring counties. Others came from much farther away. They viewed the artifacts, studied the maps, read Carter's notes, learned about Vitachuco, learned about the lake region, learned about the people who lived there long before modern Florida existed. Near the entrance stood a plaque. Simple, elegant, meaningful. It contained only a few words, "Remember us." Below those words appeared another inscription, dedicated to the memory of those who came before us, and to those who ensure their stories continue to be told. Jeremy smiled every time he saw it. One evening near the end of summer, Jeremy returned to Lake Santa Fe, alone. The sun hung low above the horizon. Golden light danced across the water. Fish occasionally broke the surface. An osprey circled overhead. The scene looked almost identical to the day he found the first artifact. Yet everything felt different. He sat quietly on the old shoreline, thinking, reflecting, listening. The mystery was solved, at least as solved as history ever becomes. Some questions remained unanswered. Perhaps they always would. The exact location of every event, the full meaning of every symbol, the complete story of every person involved. History rarely gives perfect answers, But that wasn't the point. The point was remembering. The point was caring. The point was listening. Jeremy reached into his pocket and removed a small stone. Not one of the artifacts, just an ordinary stone from the shore of Lake Santa Fe. He turned it over in his hand, then smiled, because he finally understood something Richard Henry Carter had discovered years earlier. The greatest treasure isn't what we find, it's what we preserve. The stories, the memories, the connections, the people, the land. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, the sky exploded into shades of orange, purple, and gold. Jeremy stood, looked across the lake one final time, then began walking home. Behind him, Lake Santa Fe shimmered beneath the evening sky. Ancient, beautiful, timeless, and somewhere among the lakes, marshes, forests, and hidden mounds of North Florida, the land still remembered. Chapter 16. The Land Remembers. 20 years later, the sunrise over Lake Santa Fe looked exactly the same. That was the first thing Jeremy noticed. 20 years had passed. Roads had changed. Buildings had changed. People had changed. But the lake remained. Calm, beautiful, timeless. The water reflected the morning sky in shades of gold and orange. A gentle breeze drifted across the shoreline. An osprey circled overhead. Somewhere in the distance a fish jumped. The sounds felt familiar, comforting, like an old friend. Jeremy stood quietly with his hands in his pockets. At 36 years old, he found himself returning here often, especially when life became busy, especially when he needed perspective. Some places simply had a way of grounding you. Lake Santa Fe was one of those places. Beside him stood his 10-year-old son, Clay. The boy stared out across the water. An arrowhead rested in his palm, found legally that morning on family property with permission. His eyes never left it. Jeremy smiled. He recognized that look immediately. Curiosity, wonder, questions. The exact same expression he had worn at that age. The exact same expression that had started everything. Dad? Jeremy looked down. Yeah? Clay held up the arrowhead. You really think somebody used this? Jeremy nodded. Absolutely. Like a long time ago? A very long time ago. Clay turned it over carefully. That's crazy. Jeremy laughed softly. It kind of is. The boy looked back toward the lake. The same lake was here? The same lake. The same water? Pretty much. Clay stared silently. The idea seemed impossible. A child standing in the present, holding something from the distant past, looking at the same landscape people had known centuries earlier. Jeremy remembered having the same realization. It had changed him. Maybe it was about to change Clay, too. The two walked slowly along the shoreline. The grass brushed against their legs. Birds moved through the reeds. The lake sparkled beneath the morning sun. Clay eventually broke the silence. Dad? Yeah? Tell me the story again. Jeremy smiled. The whole thing? The good parts. Jeremy laughed. That's all of it. Clay groaned. Dad. Okay. The boy grinned. Jeremy looked out across the water toward the distant tree line, toward the places where everything had begun. The artifact, the map, Miss Amy, Noah, Richard Henry Carter, Vitachuco, the mystery, the journey, the lessons, the memories. So much had happened since then. Miss Amy had retired years ago, yet she still volunteered at community events. Noah had become a science teacher, exactly as everyone expected. The historical exhibit continued drawing visitors from across Florida. Every year new students visited. Every year new questions were asked. Every year another generation discovered the story. Jeremy considered that the greatest success of all. "You know that land over there?" Jeremy asked. Clay nodded. "Long before Melrose existed, people lived there." "Native Americans?" "Yes." "What were they like?" Jeremy smiled. The answer came easily. "They were families." Clay frowned. "Families? Just like us?" The boy looked surprised. "They fished." "They hunted." "They raised children." "They laughed." "They argued." "They told stories." "They watched sunsets over this same lake." Clay looked back at the water. "The same lake?" Jeremy nodded. "The very same one." The realization settled over the boy. History suddenly became personal, human, real, not dates, not facts, people. That was always the most important lesson. Clay skipped a stone across the water. It bounced 3 times, then sank. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "The battle really happened?" Jeremy looked toward the horizon. The question deserved an honest answer. "We know a battle happened." Clay nodded. "We know Chief Vitachuco was real." Another nod. "We know the De Soto expedition came through Florida." The boy waited. Jeremy smiled. "And we know historians are still studying exactly where everything happened." Clay grinned. "So we don't know everything?" "Exactly." The boy looked pleased, like he had solved part of the mystery himself. Maybe he had. Later that morning, they reached the old historical marker near the lake, the same one Jeremy often visited. The bronze plaque reflected sunlight. Visitors occasionally stopped to read it. Most continued on their way, but some stayed. Some became curious. Some started asking questions. That was how stories survived. One question at a time. Clay stopped reading halfway through. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "What do you think happened to Richard Henry Carter?" Jeremy smiled. It was a good question, one he'd thought about many times. "I think he found what he was looking for." Clay frowned. "The artifacts?" "No." "The clues?" "No." "The answer?" Jeremy shook his head. "I think he found a reason." "A reason for what?" "To keep telling the story." The boy considered that, then nodded. "I like that." "So do I." The sun climbed higher. The morning grew warmer. Around them, life continued. Boats moved across the lake. Birds hunted for fish. Families prepared for another Florida day. Nothing dramatic, nothing extraordinary. Just life. The same kind of life people had lived here for generations. The same kind of life that connected the past and present. Jeremy placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You ready to head home?" Clay nodded, then paused. He looked across the water one final time. The forests, the marshes, the shoreline, the history hidden beneath it all. And for just a moment, Jeremy could almost see the future, another generation, another storyteller, another keeper of memory, the story continuing exactly as it should. Together they began walking back toward town. The morning sun warmed their backs. Behind them, Lake Santa Fe shimmered beneath the Florida sky, ancient, beautiful, timeless, and somewhere among the lakes, forests, hammocks, and hidden mounds of North Florida, the land still remembered the end. Thank you for listening to Vitachuco, the Mounds of Melrose, by my Florida Short Stories. We hope you enjoyed this journey through the lakes, forests, ancient mounds, and forgotten history of North Florida. Stories like this remind us that history isn't just found in books. It's found in the land beneath our feet, the communities we call home, and the stories passed down from one generation to the next. If you enjoyed this audiobook, please take a moment to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps us continue preserving and sharing the history, legends, folklore, and small-town stories that make Florida such a special place. Be sure to tell us where you're listening from. Whether you're here in Melrose, somewhere else in Florida, across the United States, or anywhere around the world, we'd love to hear from you. Follow My Florida Short Stories on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram for more free audiobooks, local history, mysteries, legends, and adventures from the Sunshine State. From our hometown of Melrose, Florida, thank you for supporting local storytelling. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep listening for the stories hidden all around you. Because every lake has a legend, every road has a history, and somewhere beneath the pines and palmettos of old Florida, the land remembers. Good night, and we'll see you on the next adventure. Welcome to my Florida short stories, proudly based in the historic lake community of Melrose, Florida. Nestled among the waters of Lake Santa Fe, the pine forests, winding back roads, and hidden corners of North Florida, Melrose is a place where history, legends, and storytelling come alive. Before we begin, we'd like to thank you for listening and supporting local storytelling. Today's adventure is Vitachuco, the Mounds of Melrose, a historical mystery inspired by the real history, Native American heritage, and enduring legends of the lake region of North Florida. If you enjoy this story, please take a moment to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Let us know where you're listening from. We love hearing from listeners across Florida, across America, and around the world. So find a comfortable seat, settle in, and join us as we journey through ancient mounds, forgotten maps, hidden artifacts, and one of the greatest historical mysteries ever connected to Florida. Travel back through centuries of adventure, courage, and discovery. This is Vitachuco, the Mounds of Melrose, written by my Florida short stories. Narrated for those who believe every lake has a legend, every trail has a story, and every piece of Florida has a history worth remembering.